At its core, setting boundaries is an act of self-respect and self-preservation. It is one of the most crucial, yet often misunderstood aspects of self-love. Society often paints the picture that love is unconditional, and in some ways it is, but unconditional love does not mean tolerating everything, accepting mistreatment, or allowing ourselves to be drained by others. In fact, true love for ourselves requires that we actively protect our emotional, mental, and physical space. Boundaries are not barriers to connection. Rather, they are the framework for healthy, thriving relationships. When we think of boundaries, we may often imagine them as rigid walls that separate us from others, but that's not what they are. Boundaries are flexible, yet firm. They are a declaration that we are worthy of respect, consideration, and kindness, both from ourselves and others. In relationships, boundaries help us preserve our sense of self. They prevent us from losing ourselves in someone else's needs or demands, and they help us keep our energy intact. We have to understand that setting boundaries isn't about pushing people away or rejecting them. It's about creating a space where both people can exist and thrive without one person constantly sacrificing their peace for the other. We set boundaries, we are acknowledging our needs, acknowledging our limits, and recognizing that we are not obligated to say yes to everything that comes our way. Many of us struggle with saying no, especially when we're afraid of disappointing others or losing their approval. We might convince ourselves that saying yes is the only way to keep the peace or maintain the relationship. But what happens when we constantly say yes, even when we're stretched too thin, even when we're emotionally exhausted? What happens when we don't set boundaries? We end up drained, resentful, and disconnected from ourselves. Over time, that accumulation of unmet needs, suppressed emotions, and unresolved discomfort can lead to burnout, anxiety, and even a loss of identity. The weight of neglecting our own needs for the sake of others starts to build up, and it can quietly chip away at our mental and emotional well-being. But setting boundaries is hard, especially if we're used to people pleasing or are afraid of conflict. We may fear that if we set limits, others will reject us, criticize us, or walk away. But here's the truth. The people who truly value us, who love us for who we are, will respect our boundaries. They won't take it personally when we say no. They will appreciate that we're honoring our own needs, and they'll likely feel more comfortable doing the same for themselves. Boundaries don't just apply to others. They also extend to ourselves. Loving yourself enough to set boundaries means being honest with yourself about what you need, even if it's hard to face those truths. Sometimes we have to set boundaries with our own habits, our own negative self-talk, or our own inner critics. It's about giving yourself permission to rest, to say no when you're overwhelmed, and to prioritize your well-being. The power of boundaries also means recognizing that it's okay to let go of relationships or situations that no longer align with your values, your growth, or your sense of peace. Sometimes loving yourself means stepping away from something, even if it's difficult. It doesn't mean the relationship was wrong or that the person is bad. It simply means that your emotional health is more important than remaining in an environment that doesn't honor your boundaries. The beauty of setting boundaries is that it isn't a one-time thing. It's a continuous practice. You will likely need to reassess and adjust your boundaries as your life changes, as you evolve, and as the dynamics of your relationships shift. The more we practice setting and maintaining boundaries, the more we reinforce the message to ourselves and others that we are worthy of care, respect, and space. Ultimately, boundaries are not about building walls between you and others. They are about creating a space where you can be your authentic self, where you can engage fully, and where you can engage from a place of strength and clarity. In a world that constantly asks us to measure our value through external achievements, appearances, or the opinions of others, it can be incredibly difficult to remember that our worth isn't something that can be defined or confirmed by anyone but ourselves. The concept of self-worth is not just a lofty idea, it's the foundation of our emotional and mental well-being. When we rely on validation from others, we hand over control of how we feel about ourselves to people who may not fully understand or appreciate us. But when we cultivate self-worth from within, we become the architects of our own happiness. And that's where true power lies. Self-worth is not something that can be earned or lost based on external factors. It's intrinsic. It's the quiet, unshakable understanding that you matter simply because you exist. You don't need to prove your value to anyone. You don't need someone else's approval to be worthy of love, respect, or success. The truth is that every human being carries inherent worth, but it's easy to forget this in a world that celebrates comparison, competition, and the need to constantly strive for validation. When we constantly seek validation from others, whether it's through social media likes, praise from our peers, or approval from family, we are placing our emotional well-being in the hands of people who may not fully understand our inner world. Validation from others can feel good in the moment, but it's temporary. It's a fleeting feeling that fades away as soon as the next compliment is given or the next criticism is received. And as we continually seek that validation, we start to look outward instead of inward, often neglecting the one person who can offer us the most consistent and unshakable form of validation, ourselves. The need for validation can stem from many places. It might come from childhood experiences where love and acceptance were tied to achievements, or from societal pressures that teach us that our worth is contingent upon how we look, what we own, or what we accomplish. The danger in relying on external validation is that it keeps us in a cycle of seeking approval, of needing someone else to tell us that we're enough. And that cycle never truly brings peace. There's always the possibility of rejection, criticism, or a lack of acknowledgement that can make us feel like we're not enough, even when we are. When we operate from a place of seeking validation, we begin to question our worth whenever we face criticism or rejection. We might take things personally, doubting our abilities, our strengths, and even our character. We might start to feel like we're not good enough, like we're constantly falling short. But when we shift our focus to our own sense of self-worth, we stop measuring ourselves against the ever-changing expectations and judgments of others. Instead, we start to appreciate ourselves for who we truly are, flaws, strengths, and all. Building self-worth is a practice, a daily commitment to remind ourselves that we are enough. It means looking at ourselves with compassion, with kindness, and recognizing that we are worthy of love and respect regardless of what others think or say. It's not about arrogance or self-centeredness. It's about understanding and accepting that you deserve the same love and respect that you give to others. One powerful way to foster self-worth is through self-compassion. Self-compassion involves treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a close friend. When we mess up, when we feel vulnerable, when we experience pain, we tend to be our own harshest critics. We might tell ourselves that we're failures, that we don't measure up, or that we're not enough. But practicing self-compassion is about silencing that inner critic and instead offering ourselves understanding and care. It's about recognizing that imperfections are part of the human experience and that they don't make us any less worthy of love or success. When we stop seeking validation and start valuing ourselves, we change the way we approach relationships, work, and life in general. We become less dependent on others' opinions to guide our actions and decisions. Instead of seeking approval, we begin to make choices based on what feels right for us, what aligns with our values, and what promotes our own well-being. We stop measuring our success based on someone else's standards, and instead, we define success by how true we are to ourselves. It's also important to note that when we value ourselves first, we're better equipped to engage in healthier, more balanced relationships. We no longer enter relationships from a place of neediness or a desire for validation. Instead, we enter relationships as whole, complete individuals who offer love and connection without expecting something in return. We give freely, not to gain approval, but because we have enough love and respect for ourselves to share with others. Self-worth over validation isn't just about quieting the noise of external opinions. It's about building a strong internal foundation that allows us to stand tall in our own truth. It's about knowing that we are enough, even on our bad days, even when we don't meet the standards of others, and even when we don't have all the answers. The journey of self-worth is a lifelong process of rediscovering who we are, embracing our uniqueness, and learning to trust that we are worthy of all the good things life has to offer simply because we exist. One of the most difficult aspects of life is coming to terms with the things we can't control. We like to think that we are the masters of our fate, the drivers of our own destiny, and in many ways, we are. But there are so many factors in our lives that lie beyond our control. Other people's actions, the natural course of events, and circumstances that we simply cannot change, no matter how hard we try. The harder we grip onto these things, the more we end up suffocating our peace of mind, our sense of self, and our emotional well-being. At its core, releasing control is about accepting the limits of our influence. It's a recognition that there are forces outside of our grasp that will unfold in their own way, regardless of our desires or expectations. The more we try to control these things, the more frustrated and exhausted we become. And in trying to maintain that control, we may unknowingly create stress, resentment, and emotional turmoil that could have been avoided if we simply allowed ourselves to release the need for control. Releasing what we can't control doesn't mean giving up or being passive. It's not about surrendering to the whims of fate in a way that leaves us powerless. Rather, it's an act of liberation. It's recognizing that the only thing we truly have control over is ourselves, our reactions, our decisions, our boundaries, and our emotional responses. And once we accept that truth, we find a profound sense of freedom. This need to control often arises from fear. We fear the unknown, we fear the potential pain of disappointment or loss, and we fear what might happen if we step back and allow life to unfold naturally. But the reality is that by holding on so tightly, we create a form of emotional resistance that keeps us stuck in patterns of anxiety, frustration, and even self-doubt. The fear of letting go can hold us captive in situations that drain us emotionally, spiritually, and physically. The desire to control, to manipulate outcomes, can lead to a constant state of unrest and tension in our lives. Take, for example, relationships. How often do we try to control the behaviors of others, believing that if we do enough, say enough, or change ourselves enough, we can make things work? We try to fix the unfixable or change what is beyond our power. We might bend over backward to meet someone else's needs, hoping that if we're good enough or right enough, they'll change or the relationship will improve. But the reality is that people are not projects to be fixed, and we cannot control their actions, choices, or feelings. The more we try, the more we lose sight of our own well-being and the authenticity of the relationship. What we fail to realize is that true connection is about mutual respect, effort, and growth, not about trying to force or manipulate someone into something they are not ready for. This is where the practice of releasing control becomes transformative. It's about surrendering the need to dictate how things should unfold and instead allowing things to evolve as they are meant to. Releasing control is not an act of resignation, it is an act of trust. Trusting that life, in all of its unpredictability, will lead us exactly where we need to be, even if it doesn't follow the path we imagined. It's trusting that no matter what happens, we will be okay. Letting go also means freeing ourselves from the burden of perfection. We often try to control our outcomes because we are terrified of failure, rejection, or disappointment. But when we relinquish the need to control everything, we create space for growth, vulnerability, and authenticity. We give ourselves permission to make mistakes and to not have everything figured out. Perfectionism thrives in the desire to control, but perfectionism only ever brings anxiety, self-criticism, and an inability to embrace life as it is. When we release the need for perfection, we make room for our humanity, the beauty of imperfection. In our professional lives, we often hold on tightly to the desire to control how others perceive us, how our careers progress, or the way projects unfold. But no matter how much effort we put into micromanaging, we can never control every aspect of a situation. The more we try, the more we create unnecessary stress and anxiety. We become bogged down by things that are out of our control, such as office politics, the success of others, or the reactions of our bosses and peers. These are things we cannot dictate, and holding on to the illusion of control leaves us exhausted and emotionally drained. In this context, releasing control means focusing on what we can control: our own effort, our ability to adapt, and our resilience in the face of uncertainty. We don't have to predict the future, and we don't have to force outcomes. We can take deliberate action, give our best, and let go of the pressure to control everything that is outside of our influence. When we release this need, releasing what we can't control is ultimately an act of trust in ourselves, in life, and in the process of growth. It's a decision to stop fighting against the natural ebb and flow of existence and to instead lean into it with grace, openness, and curiosity. One of the most profound acts of self-love is the ability to choose yourself, choosing your own peace, your own happiness, and your own well-being, even when it feels difficult or uncomfortable. In a world that constantly asks us to put others first, to be accommodating, to be selfless, and to prioritize everyone else's needs over our own, the act of choosing ourselves can feel like a radical, even selfish decision. But the truth is, it takes immense courage to prioritize yourself, to put your own needs above the expectations and demands of others. And this is the kind of courage that leads to true freedom, healing, and growth. When we talk about prioritizing ourselves, we aren't advocating for selfishness in the traditional sense. We're not talking about abandoning our responsibilities, neglecting the people we love, or acting in a way that disregards the needs of others. What we're talking about is the ability to stand firmly in our own worth and to recognize that we too are deserving of the care, attention, and love that we so often give to others. Prioritizing ourselves means recognizing that we cannot pour from an empty cup. It means acknowledging that if we don't take care of our own physical, emotional, and mental health, we won't be able to show up fully for the people who matter most to us. In many cases, the reason we don't prioritize ourselves is because we've been conditioned to believe that doing so is wrong. We're taught from a young age that being kind and selfless means putting others first. And while these are admirable qualities, they shouldn't come at the expense of our own well-being. Over time, we can get caught in a cycle where we give and give, always placing the needs of others before our own. We convince ourselves that we are doing the right thing by sacrificing our own happiness and peace to make sure others are taken care of. But what happens when we neglect ourselves for too long? We become depleted, burned out, and disconnected from who we really are. We lose sight of what brings us joy, what fills us up, and what we need to feel whole. Choosing yourself means breaking free from the martyrdom narrative that says you must give everything to others and expect nothing in return. It means being willing to say no when you need to, even if it's hard. It's saying no to activities, obligations, or relationships that drain your energy, that ask too much of you, or that no longer align with your values. Saying no is an act of self-respect, not selfishness. It's a way of telling yourself, I am worth more than being overextended, and I deserve to create space for my own healing and growth. The ability to say no with kindness and clarity is a form of self-love and self-protection. The courage to prioritize yourself also means giving yourself permission to take breaks, to rest, and to seek the time you need to rejuvenate. In a culture that celebrates busyness and productivity, rest is often seen as a luxury or a sign of weakness. But rest is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Without rest, our bodies, minds, and spirits become worn out. We cannot give our best when we are exhausted. Taking time for yourself, whether it's through quiet moments of reflection, creative pursuits, physical activity, or simply doing nothing, is a powerful act of honoring your own needs. It's a way of saying, I matter enough to stop and take care of myself. Prioritizing yourself also means embracing your own desires and dreams, even if they seem unconventional or counter to the expectations placed on you by others. It means giving yourself permission to pursue your passions and goals, even if they seem difficult, risky, or selfish in the eyes of others. There is a quiet strength in choosing your own path, even when it's different from what others expect. But choosing yourself means honoring your own desires, even if those desires go against the grain. When we prioritize ourselves, we stop looking to others for permission to be who we truly are and start living in alignment with our authentic selves. The courage to prioritize yourself is especially crucial when it comes to relationships. So often we allow ourselves to become enmeshed in the needs and emotions of those around us, putting our own needs last. In relationships, we may feel guilty for taking time for ourselves, for setting boundaries, or for asserting our own needs. But healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and balance. If you're constantly sacrificing your own well-being to make someone else happy, the relationship becomes one-sided and unhealthy. Prioritizing yourself in a relationship means being honest about your needs, being willing to communicate openly, and being unafraid to ask for the space or support you need. It means that your happiness and peace are just as important as anyone else's. In addition to relationships, the courage to prioritize yourself also applies to your work and career. We live in a society that values achievement and success above all else, often at the cost of our own health and well-being. Many of us have internalized the idea that we have to prove ourselves through our work, constantly striving to meet expectations, chase promotions, or achieve outward success. But this pursuit of external validation can leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled. True success doesn't come from meeting someone else's expectations. It comes from pursuing work that aligns with your values, your passions, and your purpose. Prioritizing yourself in your career means having the courage to say no to work that drains you, to walk away from toxic environments, and to seek work that allows you to thrive, not just professionally, but personally and emotionally as well. Ultimately, the courage to prioritize yourself means trusting that your needs matter. It's about knowing that taking care of yourself is not an act of selfishness, it's an act of survival. It's about creating the space and the energy you need to live authentically, to be present in your relationships, and to pursue your dreams with the confidence that you are worthy of every opportunity. Choosing yourself requires vulnerability because it means acknowledging your own needs, desires, and limits. It also means embracing the discomfort that comes with saying no, stepping back, and putting yourself first when the world is constantly telling you to do the opposite. But this courage, the courage to prioritize yourself, is what allows you to live a full, healthy, and vibrant life. It is through choosing yourself time and time again that you begin to cultivate the kind of self-love and self-respect that will carry you through the challenges and triumphs of life. You are worthy of the space, the time, and the care you give to others. The courage to prioritize yourself isn't just an act of self-care. It's a declaration that you are worthy of living a life that reflects your deepest values and desires. The past holds a magnetic power over us, drawing us into its grip with memories, regrets, unresolved emotions, and old patterns of behavior. It can often feel as though the past is an indelible part of who we are, shaping our identity and coloring our present reality. But the truth is, while the past has undoubtedly influenced us, it does not need to define us. In fact, one of the most powerful acts of self-liberation we can engage in is the process of letting go of the past, releasing the hold it has on our hearts and minds, and embracing the opportunity to build a future that aligns with who we truly are, not who we once were. Letting go of the past doesn't mean erasing it, forgetting it, or pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that we stop learning from our experiences or that we ignore the lessons we've gained along the way. The past is a collection of moments that have shaped us into the people we are today. But it's crucial to recognize that while the past is a part of our story, it's not the whole story. Holding on to past wounds, mistakes, or traumas, however, can prevent us from fully stepping into the present moment and embracing the potential that lies ahead. We might get trapped in the cycle of rehashing past events, reliving painful moments, or wishing things had turned out differently. But this constant focus on the past can keep us from fully engaging with our lives now. One of the most challenging aspects of letting go of the past is the attachment we often form to our old stories. We identify with the pain, the hurt, the failures, and the disappointments that we've experienced. And these stories become a part of how we view ourselves. We start to believe that because we've been hurt, we are somehow broken. We may carry around old narratives of failure or rejection, telling ourselves that we're not worthy of love, success, or happiness because of things that have happened in the past. These stories, however, only serve to limit our growth and keep us anchored to an identity that is no longer serving us. Letting go of the past requires us to separate who we are from the stories we tell ourselves. It means recognizing that just because something happened to us doesn't mean that it defines us. For example, if we've experienced a significant failure in our lives, we might carry around the belief that we are incapable of success or that we'll always fall short. This belief is rooted in our past experience, but it does not have to govern our future. By acknowledging that we are not defined by our mistakes or failures, we create the space to redefine ourselves in ways that are empowering and aligned with our true potential. Another powerful part of letting go of the past is freeing ourselves from the grip of regret. Regret is a heavy emotional burden, one that ties us to what could have been instead of what is. We often look back on our lives and wish we had made different choices or wonder how our lives might have turned out had we acted differently. But the truth is, the past is gone. We cannot change it, no matter how much we dwell on it. The energy we spend regretting what has already happened is energy that could be spent building a future that aligns with who we want to become. Letting go of regret doesn't mean we ignore the consequences of our actions or that we stop learning from our experiences. It simply means that we release the emotional weight of regret so that we can move forward with greater clarity, wisdom, and self-compassion. The past also often carries with it old wounds, wounds that may not have fully healed, wounds that we've buried deep within ourselves, and wounds that continue to shape how we view the world and interact with others. Whether these wounds are from past relationships, childhood experiences, or other difficult times in our lives, they can hold an immense power over us, even if we don't realize it. When we carry around unhealed wounds, they often inform how we respond to current situations, and we may find ourselves repeating old patterns of behavior or feeling triggered by things that remind us of the past. This can be exhausting and limiting, and it can prevent us from forming healthy, fulfilling relationships or pursuing new opportunities. Letting go of the past in this context means confronting these wounds and choosing to heal. It's a process that involves acknowledging the pain, allowing ourselves to feel it, and then making the conscious decision to release its hold on our lives. Healing from past wounds is not about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about freeing ourselves from the emotional baggage that continues to affect our present. It's about recognizing that while the past may have shaped us, it does not have to define the trajectory of our lives moving forward. One of the ways we can start to let go of the past is by practicing forgiveness, both for ourselves and for others. Forgiveness does not mean that we condone or excuse harmful actions. Rather, it is an act of self-liberation. Holding on to anger, resentment, or grudges only hurts us. It keeps us tied to the past and prevents us from fully experiencing the present. Forgiveness allows us to release the emotional weight of past grievances and step into a space of peace and possibility. It's an act of grace, one that frees us to move forward with clarity and without the heavy burden of past pain. Letting go of the past also requires a shift in mindset, a shift away from seeing ourselves as victims of our circumstances and instead embracing the power we have to create the life we want. It's about reclaiming agency over our own narrative and choosing to view the future with hope and possibility rather than fear or limitation. When we let go of the past, we embrace the idea that we are constantly evolving, constantly growing, and that the future holds endless potential for transformation. This shift in perspective is incredibly liberating. It frees us from the tyranny of past experiences and allows us to step into the fullness of our lives unburdened by old narratives and unhealed wounds. Letting go of the past is a choice to reclaim our power and our peace and to create a future that aligns with our highest aspirations, not our past struggles. It's a powerful reminder that the present moment is all we truly have. And it's in this moment that we have the ability to shape our lives and our future.